First, I wish to say that I have not come here to talk about Henry David Thoreau's philosophy or his purpose or aim in life. But I do wish to show you pictures of the countryside where he spent most of his life and took pleasure in walking, and from which he drew the inspiration for his writings. With each picture, I shall give a quotation. As he said, "I have traveled a good deal in Concord." It was on July 4th, 1845, that he went to Walden Pond, where he spent 2 years and 2 months in a house which he built himself. He said, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life. I dug my cellar in the side of a hill sloping to the south. And I wish so to live ever as to derive my satisfactions and inspirations from the commonest events, everyday phenomena, so what my senses hourly perceive, my daily walk, the conversation of my neighbors may inspire me, and I may dream of no heaven but that which lies about me. There is the calmness of the lake when there is not a breath of wind. All the world goes by us and is reflected in our deeps. Such clarity, obtained by such pure means, by simple living, by honesty of purpose. I feel my Maker blessing me. The scenery of this small pond is humble, though very beautiful, and does not approach to grandeur, nor can it much concern one who has not long frequented it or lived by its shore. At Walden, the shore is now more beautifully painted. The high blueberries about the pond have still a few leaves left on, turned bright scarlet red. These it is adorn the shore so, seen at a distance on Walden Bank. Encircling the pond, a narrow shelf-like path, as old probably as the race of man here, worn by the feet of aboriginal hunters. Apparently an Indian mortar, a dark granite-like stone with a regular round cavity worn in it. It is a matter of wonder how the Indians made even those rude implements without iron or steel tools to work with. Especially the hillsides about Walden begin to wear these autumnal tints in the cooler air. These lit leaves, this glowing, bright-tinted shrubbery, is in singular harmony with the dry, stony shore of this cool and deep well, and many beautifully freckled leaves. All our Concord waters have two colors at least. Walden is blue at one time and green at another. I love to pause and look down into the water and study its bottom, its little mystery. The moon is just rising. She has not yet freed herself from the clouds of earth and reached the clear and serene heavens. The railroad is perhaps our pleasantest and wildest road. It only makes deep cuts into and through the hills. The woods are left to hang over it, though straight is wild in its accompaniments. It is the driest walking in wet weather and the easiest in snowy. The Fitchburg Railroad touches the pond about 100 rods south of where I dwell. I usually go to the village along its causeway. In the deepest snows, the path which I used from the highway to my house was about half a mile long. No weather interfered fatally with my walks, or rather my going abroad, for I frequently tramped 8 or 10 miles through the deepest snow to keep an appointment with a beech tree or a yellow birch, or an old acquaintance among the pines. The snow has fallen so gently that it forms an upright wall on the slenderest twig. The pitch pines are covered with soft globular masses. This is a very mild, melting winter day, but clear and bright. Yet I see the blue shadows of the snow. The north side of Walden is a warm walk in sunny weather. If you're sick and despairing, go forth in winter and see the red alder catkins dangling at the extremity of the twigs, all in the wintry air, promising a new spring and the fulfillment of all our hopes. The water or lake, from however distant a point seen, is always the center of the landscape. Fairhaven lies more open and can be seen from more distant points than any other of our ponds. How peaceful great nature. In all my rambles, I have seen no landscape which can make me forget Fairhaven. I still sit on its cliff and look over the woods and the river and hear the birds sing with the same delight as ever. It is as sweet a mystery as ever what this world is. Well Meadow. At the head of this meadow, where many springs ooze out from under the hill and saturate the ground, dissolving the snow early in the spring, in the midst or on the edge of a narrow open alder swamp, there look for the earliest skunk cabbage. Andromeda swamps. The Andromeda is a brownish green. Very little of the redness left. Now the sun is getting low. It looks like a large bed of greenish gray moss, reflecting the light. The hornet's nest, not brown but gray, 2 shades, whitish and dark, alternating on the outer layers, giving it a waved appearance, is built with many thin layers of his paper, with an interval of about 1/8 of an inch between them. This probably for warmth, dryness, lightness. So sometimes the carpenter has learned to build double walls. The Sudbury River. I was born upon thy bank, river. My blood flows in thy stream, and thou meanderest forever at the bottom of my dream. Pickerel weed. Nature will soon be very lavish of this blue along the riverside. It is a rich spike of blue flowers with yellowish spots. Over all these flowers hover devil's needles in their zigzag flight. The water milkweed flower is an interesting red, here and there like roses along the shore. To Assabet. For about 1/3 the way from the factory dam to the powder mills, the river is broad and deep, in short, a mill pond. Egg Rock. In the main stream at the rock, I am surprised to see flags and pads, laying the foundation of an islet in the middle, where I had thought it deep before. Apparently a hummock, lifted by ice, sunk there in the spring, and this may be the way in which many an island has been formed in the river. The Sudbury and Assabet rivers meet here and form the Concord River. Salix alba, willows. Their catkins, together with their leaves, make the greatest show now of any trees, whose growth makes an impression on the careless and distant observer, a tender yellowish green. It is pleasant to remember those quiet Sabbath mornings by remote stagnant rivers and ponds, when pure white water lilies, just expanded, not yet infested by insects, float on the waveless water and perfume the atmosphere. Nature never appears more serene and innocent and fragrant. It requires some skill as to get a long stem. Water lilies, a superb flower, our lotus, queen of the waters. How sweet, innocent, wholesome its fragrance, how pure its white petals, though its root is in the mud. The sumacs are generally crimson, and young trees and bushes by the water are beginning to glow red and yellow. Birches. So far as the birches go, it is a perfect autumnal scene there. There is first the clean, light-reflecting russet earth, the dark blue water, the dark or dingy green evergreens, the dull reddish-brown of young oaks and shrub oaks, the gray of maples and other leafless trees, and the white of birch stems. The ice is 18 inches thick on Fairhaven. Saw some pickerel just caught there with a fine luster on them. Goodwin and company are fishing today. They've had but poor luck, 1 middling-sized pickerel and 1 perch, only since 9 or 10 o'clock. And if not catching many fish, still getting what they went for, though they may not be aware of it. That is, a wilder experience than the town affords. While yet it is cold January, and snow and ice are thick and solid, the prudent landlord comes from the village to get ice. He cuts and saws the solid pond, unroofs the house of fishes, and carts off their very element and air. It looks like solidified azure. When I go to Willow Bay, I see the new musquash houses erected, conspicuous on the now nearly leafless shores. I remember this phenomenon annually for 30 years. Many are out shooting musquash, the energy and excitement of the musquash hunter. Even this is inspiriting to me. He turned up on the bank. Now that the river is rapidly rising, he will return wet and weary and weather-beaten to his hut with an appetite for his supper. A fine, clear morning. The ground white with frost and a low mist curling over the smooth water, now in the sunlight, which gives the water a silver-plated look. The distant Lincoln Hills in the horizon, the air so clear and wholesome, and the surface of the earth so pleasingly varied that it seems rarely fitted for the abode of man. Mount Misery from the Mine Hill. The season of morning fogs has arrived. I see the ambrosial fog stretched over the river, draping the trees. These are our fairest days, which are born in a fog. The distant river is like molten silver at this hour. It merely reflects the light, not the blue. I see many perfectly geometrical cobwebs on the trees, with from 26 to 30 odd rays. They are more conspicuous for being thickly strewn with minute drops of the mist or dew. Lee's Cliffs. The loudest sound which burdens here, the breeze, is the wood's whisper. 'Tis when we choose to list, audible sound, and when we list not, it is calm profound. Bound Rock. We're 4 towns bound on a rock in the river, Lincoln, Wayland, Sudbury, Concord. And there stand all around the alders and birches and oaks and maples. It is very cold and freezing, this wind. The water has blown quite across the causeway in some places. It is blown and dashes against the trees and encrusts them with ice. A very wintry sight. Down the railroad to see the glaze, the first we have had this year. This morning we have something between ice and frost on the trees. Standing on the north side of a tree, looking against the sky, you see only a white ghost of a tree. This afternoon fair, but high wind and drifting snow. The river is unusually high, owing to the melting of the snow. The wind from over the meadows is laden with a strong scent of musk, and by its racy freshness advertises us of an unexplored wildness. The river is so high on the meadows, and the water so smooth and glassy withal, that I am reminded of a calm April day during the freshets. Whatever stands on the brink is reflected with wonderful distinctness. I can see cows in a pasture. It makes a pretty landscape. It is a pleasant life they lead in summer, roaming in well-watered pastures, grazing, and chewing the cud in the shade. The strength of calves is remarkable. With their 4 feet, they have a good hold on earth. I was amused by Ralph Waldo Emerson telling me that he drove his own calf out of the yard as it was coming in with a cow, not knowing it to be his own, a drove going by at the time. The whole house, methought, was well planted, rested solidly on the earth with its green bank and stately elms. Most of these houses slanted to 1 story behind. How happens it that we reverence the stones that fall from another planet and not the stones which belong to this? Is not our broad backdoor stone as good as any cornerstone in heaven? And where could they better afford to tarry meanwhile than on the bank of a river? Young robins peep, young robins, dark speckled. Stopped at Barrett's sawmill, was attracted by the music of his saw. I find that we are now in the midst of the haying season. I see the haymakers now raking with horse rakes into long rows. For 6 weeks or more, this has been the farmer's work, to shave the surface of the fields and meadows clean, This is done all over the country. A lady tells me that she met Deacon S. of Lincoln with a load of hay. We admire the Charles Miles elms, their strong branches now more conspicuous or gracefully curved. The Jenny Dugan Brook. I'm accustomed to regard the smallest brook with as much interest for the time being as if it were the Orinoco or Mississippi. Old Marlborough Road. Now I yearn for one of those old, meandering, dry, uninhabited roads which lead away from town, where travelers are not too often to be met, where my spirit is free, where you can walk and think with the least obstruction, by which you may go to the uttermost parts of the earth. When the spring stirs my blood with the instinct to travel, I can get enough gravel on the old Marlborough Road. Nobody repairs it, for nobody wears it. It is a living way, as the Christians say. What is it but a direction out there and the bare possibility of going somewhere? Great guide-boards of stone, but travelers none. Cenotaphs of the towns, named on their crowns. It is worth going to see where you might be. Set up how or when, by what selectmen. Going through Britain's clearing, I find a black snake out enjoying the sun. The grandeur of these stupendous masses of clouds, tossed into such irregular greatness across the sky, seems thrown away on the meanness of my employment. The drapery seems altogether too rich for such poor acting. We turn aside by a large rye field. The rye fields are now quite yellow and ready for the sickle. The nodding heads of the rye make an agreeable maze to the eye. The water's smooth and full of reflections. Hardhack. Beautiful rose-colored spikes of the hardhack. Also dandelions, perhaps the first yesterday. This flower makes a great show, a sun itself in the grass. How emphatic it is. You cannot but observe it set in the liquid green grass, even at a distance. The gray color of the rock contrasts well with the green of the surrounding and more distant hills and woods and fields. The reddening sumac berries are of rare beauty. One who had the most experience and skill as a burner of brush, and the experience acquired is oftentimes worth more than the wages. Look out for your woodlots between the time when the dust first begins to blow in the streets and the leaves are partly green. I once set fire to the woods, meaning to camp. One April day, Indian-like, we succeeded in catching a mess of fish, and by the shores of Fairhaven proceeded to cook them. The earth was uncommonly dry, and our fire, kindled far from the wood, suddenly caught the dry grass of the previous year. We sprang to extinguish it, but in a few minutes it was beyond our reach, on the side of the hill. I set out through the woods to inform the owners and to raise the town. It is one of those mornings of creation. There has been a mist in the night. Now I see collected over the low grounds a fog, which looks dusty like smoke. The sky must have a few clouds, as the mind a few moods, nor is the evening less serene for them. The moon is nearly full tonight. It is perfectly still and not very cold. I know which way a mine wended this morning, which horizon it faced, by the setting of these tracks, whether it moved slowly or rapidly, by the greater or less intervals and distinctness, for the swiftest step leaves yet a lasting trace. The woodchopper today is the same man that Homer refers to, and his work the same. He no doubt had his beetle and wedge and whetstone then, carried his dinner in a pail or basket, and his liquor in a bottle, and caught his woodchucks, and cut and corded the same. Going up the hill through Stowe's young oak woodland, I listened to the sharp, dry rustle of the withered oak leaves. This is the voice of the woods now. Perhaps what moves us most in winter is some reminiscence of far-off summer. What beauty in the running brooks, what life, what society. The cold is merely superficial. It is summer still at the core. A fine Indian summer day. What strikes me in the scenery here now is the contrast of the universally blue water with the brilliant tinted woods around it. I go to Flint's Pond to see a rippling lake and a reedy island in its midst. This pond is worth coming to, if only because it is larger than Walden. Goose Pond, of small extent, is on my way to Flint's. We sit by the side of Little Goose Pond to watch the ripples on it. That very handsome cove at White Pond is at the south end, surrounded by woods. I think it is important to have water because it multiplies the heavens. These tints of brown were as softly and richly fair and sufficing as the most brilliant autumnal tints. What a wild and rich domain, that Esterbrook country. Not a cultivated, hardly a cultivable field in it. And yet it delights all natural persons. Such great rocky and moist tracts which daunt the farmer are reckoned as unimproved land, and therefore worth but little. But think of the miles of huckleberries, barberries, and wild apples. I walk for 2 or 3 miles, and still the clumps of barberries show themselves before me on every side. Wild apple trees. Some soils, like a rocky tract called the Esterbrook Country in my neighborhood, are so suited to the apple that it will grow faster without any care than it will in many places with any amount of care. Nay, they spring up wild and bear well there, in the midst of pines, birches, maples, and oaks. The old Carlisle Road, which runs through the middle of Esterbrook Country, is bordered on each side with wild apple pastures where the trees stand without order. It is a paradise for walkers in the fall. Yellow Birch Swamp. The sight of these trees affect me more than California gold. In twilight, I went through the swamp, and yellow birches sent forth a dull yellow gleam, which each time made my heart beat faster. I walked with the yellow birch. It is very pleasant and cheerful nowadays to come upon a patch of polypody on some rocky hillside in the woods, where in the midst of the dry and rustling leaves it stands so freshly green and full of life. I was as interested in the discovery of limestone as if it had been gold. Now all things seem to radiate round limestone. I read a new page in the history of these parts, in the old limestone quarries and kilns where the old settlers found the material of their houses. How symbolical, significant of I know not what, the pitch pine stands here before my door. The woodland paths are never seen to such an advantage as in a moonlit night, still opening before you as you walk, and yet your feet meet no obstacles. It is as if it were not a path, but an open winding passage through the bushes which your feet find. I perceive that almost the entire heavens are covered with a very beautiful mackerel sky. It is a luxury for the eye to rest on it. Left our horse at the Howe Tavern. The oldest date on the sign is 1716. An old woman who had been a servant in the family said she was 91, said this was the first house built on the spot. Went on to Knobscott Mountain. The Sudbury Meadows seen here and there in the distance are a peculiar bluish green. The endless variety in the forms and texture of the clouds which make the glory of the evening. Another of those memorable days. It is indeed a golden autumn. A glimpse of Nagog Pond. The scenery, when it is truly seen, reacts in the life of the seer. That is my everyday business. The world is nevertheless beautiful, though viewed through a chink or knothole. Especial I remember thee, Wachusett, who like me standest alone without society. Thy far blue eye, a remnant of the sky, upholding heaven, holding down earth. Monadnock. Who can believe that the mountain peak which he beholds 50 miles off on the horizon, rising far and faintly blue, can be the same with that which he looked up at once near at hand, and in the midst of primitive woods? As I look northwestward to that summit, how little can I realize all the life that is passing between me and it. Sorrel. Some fields are almost wholly filled with sheep sorrel, now turning red. It helps thus agreeably to paint the earth, contrasting even at a distance with the greener fields, blue sky, and dark or downy clouds. I see some long cobweb lines covered with frost. It is a remarkable day for fine gossamer cobwebs. As I walk toward the sun, I perceive that the air is full of them, streaming. A tall and slender buttonwood. I am struck with the peculiar and interesting colors of the naked arms of the buttonwood, delicate tints seen from the ground, whitish, greenish, and fawn-colored. Squirrel's nest. No wonder they are skillful climbers who are born high above the ground and begin their lives in a tree, having first of all to descend to reach the earth. The Mayflower on the point of blossoming. It is a most delicate flower, both to the eye and scent. The willow catkin might be the emblem of spring. Is not this perhaps the earliest, most obvious awakening of vegetable life? Pure white polygolas, very delicate, by the path at Harrington's mud hole. Thus many flowers have their nun sisters dressed in white. Apple blossoms. It seemed to me that the atmosphere was never so full of fragrance and spicy odors. There is a great variety in the fragrance of the apple blossoms, as well as their tints. It is good to see minot's hens pecking and scratching the ground. What never-failing health they suggest. No wonder men love to have hens about them and hear their creaking note. As is the master, such in course of time tend to become his herds and flocks as well as dogs. No doubt man impresses his own character on the beasts which he tames and employs. He said he was tired of farming. He was too old. However, he did not wish to be idle. He merely wished to rest. I enjoy the warmth of the sun now that the air is so cool, and nature seems really more genial. It leads me to ask if I have spent as industrious a spring and summer as the farmer, and gathered as rich a crop of experience. I see the light purple of the rhodora enlivening the edges of the swamps. The splendid rhodora now sets the swamps on fire with its masses of rich color. Brown daisies, another color the sun wears, flowers of the different colors of the sunlight. Ladies' slippers. Everywhere now, in the dry pitch pine woods, stand the red lady slippers over the red pine leaves on the forest floor, rejoicing in June. Meadow lily. Heavily hangs the common yellow lily in the meadows. When the yellow lily flowers in the meadows, then methinks the flowering season has reached its height. They surprise me as perhaps no other can. Now I am prepared for anything. Indian pipes. The tobacco pipes are still pushing up white amid the dry leaves, sometimes lifting a canopy of leaves with them 4 or 5 inches. I see the sunflower's broad disk now in the gardens, a true sun among flowers, monarch of August. I found the fringed gentian now somewhat touched by frost. It may have been in bloom a month. An hour ago I doubted if fringed gentians were in Concord now. It is too remarkable a flower not to be sought and admired each year, however rare. I see cardinal flowers. It shows how far a little color can go, for the flower is not large, yet it makes itself seen from afar. It is remarkable for its intensely brilliant scarlet color. The cardinals make a splendid show now. They look like slender plumes of soldiers. A few white ones are mingled with the scarlet, and one pink one. The witch hazel here is in full bloom on this magical hillside, while its broad yellow leaves are falling. It is an extremely interesting plant, October's and November's child, and yet reminds me of the very earliest spring. The sunlight from over the top of the hill lights up its topmost sprays. I lie on my back with joy under its boughs. Surveying these days the ministerial lot, this savage swamp, which a Concord merchant mortgaged to the trustees of the ministerial fund and lost. This swamp contains beautiful specimens of the side saddle flower, better called picture plant. I cannot walk without upsetting the numerous pictures, which are now full of water. No other plant, methinks, that we have is so remarkable and singular. Very brilliant, now are the prinos or black alderberries, so brilliant and fresh when most things have withered. Cranberries. I discover again that cranberries are good to eat in small quantities as you're crossing the meadows. A splendid rainbow after a light shower, with two reflections of it. It is too remarkable to be remarked on. If the day and night are such that you greet them with joy, and life admits a fragrance like flowers and sweet-scented herbs, is more elastic, more starry, more immortal, that is your success. The true harvest of my daily life is somewhat as intangible and indescribable as the tints of morning and evening. It is a little stardust caught, a segment of the rainbow which I have clutched. Sundog. The sky was all overcast, but the sun's place quite distinct. The cloud about the sun had a cold, dry, wintry look. About 3 p.m. I noticed a distinct fragment of a rainbow, about as long as wide, on the north side of the sun, and at the same height with the sun. The sundogs were not so bright as an ordinary rainbow. Sundogs are a pretty sure sign of cold and wintry weather. Hayden Sr., 68 years old, tells me that he's been at work regularly with his team almost every day this winter, in spite of snow and cold, even that cold and windy Friday. 9 degrees at 1 p.m. hauling logs to a mill. Now for some hours, the farmers have been getting home. I see the sun descending in the west. We never tire of the drama of the sunset. Every day, a new picture is painted and framed, held up for half an hour in such lights as the great artist chooses, and then withdrawn, and the curtain falls. The closing words of Thoreau's Walden seem fitting to take home with us. Only that day dawns to which we are awake. There is more day to dawn. The sun is but a morning star.
In 1854, with the publication of his masterpiece, Walden, Henry David Thoreau boasted that he had traveled much in Concord. For many years, as he said, he was self-appointed inspector of Concord snowstorms and rainstorms, and did his duty faithfully. 100 years later, Esther Howe Anderson, a charter member of the Thoreau Society, and like Thoreau, a native and lifelong resident of Concord, reading in Thoreau's works and then following his footsteps with her camera in hand, photographed through his eyes the beauties of the gentle Concord landscape. If Thoreau reported seeing the pink lady slipper blossoming in the pine woods of Conantum on May 31st, Esther went out to Conantum on May 31st, found the descendants of Henry's flowers, and photographed them. If Thoreau reported seeing a double rainbow, or a sundog, or a rare albino cardinal flower, Esther searched, often for years and years, until she had found one and photographed it. And she was not satisfied with just one photograph. She photographed the same scenes over and over until she got exactly the effect she wanted, the effect that Thoreau had described. She began taking these photographs for her own pleasure, but as word spread around, she began first showing them to a few close friends. I remember many a joyous evening spent at her 9-acre corner farm, reveling in their beauty. Later, we were able to persuade her to share them with the members of the Thoreau Society at their annual meetings in Concord. And still later, she began showing them professionally around New England. Luckily, she did her photographic work in what Thoreau would have described as the very nick of time. Concord in Thoreau's day was a sleepy little village of 2,000. Now, its population is 10 times that. In the great push to the suburbs of Boston of 30 or 40 years ago, much of the quiet ruralness of Concord disappeared. Conantum became a housing development. Walden Pond was overwhelmed with as many as 15,000 swimmers on a hot summer weekend. Superhighways bisected the countryside. With the coming of the Dutch elm disease, the beautiful wine-glass American elms disappeared from the landscape. Farmers gave up horses and took up tractors. With the coming of refrigerators, people abandoned the harvesting and storing of ice. The whole way of life changed. But photographing in the 1930s, the 40s, and the 50s, Esther caught the old ways of life before they disappeared, and the beauties of the Concord landscape before so much of it was destroyed. Thus, she has enabled us to see a Thoreau country that is now gone forever.